The Frankenberger thesis in its final forms, back to Hans Frank's memoirs, published under the title In the Face of the Gallows. Frank, who had acted as Hitler's lawyer in the late 1920s and early 1930s, states that he was commissioned by Hitler in 1930 to discreetly investigate the various rumors circulating in the press and public at the time alleging Hitler's Jewish descent. According to Frank, during detailed research, he was able to unearth some circumstantial evidence that made these rumors appear not entirely unreasonable. Hitler's grandmother Anna Maria Schicklgruber worked as a housemaid or cook in the house of a Jew from Graz named Frankenberger in the 1830s. In 1837, when she was very pregnant, she returned to her home village, where her son Alois was born. The column for the child's father was left blank in the baptismal register, but Anna Maria Schicklgruber received financial support from Frankenberger for the next 14 years. The Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917, the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. The declaration was contained in a letter dated the 2nd of November 1917 from Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, to Lord Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, for transmission to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain and Ireland. The text of the declaration was published in the press on the 9th of November 1917. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. The Transfer Agreement, the dramatic story of the pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine, is 1980 for a book written by author Edwin Black, documenting the transfer agreement, Havara Agreement in Hebrew, between Zionist organizations and Nazi Germany to transfer a number of Jews and their assets to Palestine. This book documents the agreement between Nazi Germany and an organization of German Zionists in 1933 to salvage some German Jewish assets, and the voluntary emigration of German Jews to Palestine before the Third Reich implemented expulsion and then extermination. The transfer agreement rescued some 60,000 German Jews. A sweeping, worldwide economic boycott of Germany by Jews helped spur a deal between the Nazis and Zionists. The book also documents the controversy within the Zionist movement and Jewish diaspora over the agreement, which Black shows tore apart the Jewish world in the pre-World War II era. In particular, it describes the conflict between, on one side, German Zionists and German-descended communal leaders in the US, who argued for the agreement, and, on the other side, the mainstream Eastern European-descended American Jewish Zionist leaders, such as the American Jewish Committee and Jewish war veterans, who opposed the agreement and argued instead for a full boycott of Nazi Germany. The other side, The Secret Relationship Between Nazism and Zionism, is a book by Mahmoud Abbas, published in 1984 in Arabic. It was republished in 2011. It is based on his Kansk thesis, completed in 1982 at Patrice Lumumba University, now the People's Friendship University of Russia, under the title The Connection Between the Nazis and the Leaders of the Zionist Movement, and defended at the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The central thesis of the book is that the Zionist movement and its leaders were fundamental partners of the Nazis and equally responsible for the Holocaust. Abbas' Holocaust revisionism does not deny that the Holocaust happened or that it is one of the worst crimes in history. The question he raises is, who is guilty of this crime? He posits that blaming the Nazis is only half the truth. According to Abbas, the Zionists collaborated in killing a large number of European Jews in order to encourage the rest to embrace Zionism and emigrate to Palestine. The book refers to the Haavara Agreement, in which the Third Reich agreed with the Jewish Agency to facilitate Jewish emigration from Germany to mandatory Palestine. He suggests that Israel's abduction, trial and subsequent execution of Adolf Eichmann, the high-ranking Nazi who was a main architect behind the Holocaust, was a cover-up operation. Eichmann was in the process of revealing the involvement of the Zionists in the making of the Holocaust to the American magazine Life, and was therefore silenced, says Obbers in the book. The early Israelites engaged in polytheistic practices that were common across ancient Semitic religion, because the Israelite religion was a derivative of the Canaanite religion and included a variety of deities from it, including El, Asherah, and Baal. Initially a lesser deity among the Canaanite pantheon, Yahweh in later centuries became conflated with El. Yahweh took on El's place as head of the pantheon of the Israelite religion. El's consort Asherah, and El-linked epithets, such as El-Shaddai, came to be applied to Yahweh alone. Characteristics of other deities, such as Asherah and Baal, were also selectively absorbed in conceptions of Yahweh. One scholarly position is that the identification of Yahweh with El, the later interpretation. Earlier Yahweh was thought of as one of many gods, separate from El. Theological interpretations of the Hebrew Bible consider El as an alternative name for Yahweh. This is in contrast to the Elohist and priestly traditions in which El is considered to be an earlier deity than Yahweh. Mark Smith has argued that Yahweh and El were originally separate, but were considered synonymous from very early on. El is a generic word for God that could be used for any god, including Hadid, Moloch, or Yahweh. Moloch, Molech, or Molech is a word which appears in the Hebrew Bible several times, primarily in the book of Leviticus. The Greek Septuagint translates many of these instances as their king, but maintains the word or name Moloch in others, including one additional time in the book of Amos, where the Hebrew text does not attest the name. The Bible strongly condemns practices that are associated with Moloch, which are heavily implied to include child sacrifice. Traditionally, the name Moloch has been understood as referring to a Canaanite god. However, since 1935, scholars have speculated that Moloch refers to the sacrifice itself, since the Hebrew word MLK is identical in spelling to a term that means sacrifice in the closely related Punic language. This second position has grown increasingly popular, but it remains contested. Among proponents of this second position, controversy continues as to whether the sacrifices were offered to Yahweh or another deity, and whether they were a native Israelite religious custom or a Phoenician import. In 1 Kings, Solomon is portrayed as introducing the cult of Moloch to Jerusalem. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the detestation of Moab, in the mount that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech the detestation of the children of Ammon. In 2 Kings, Moloch is associated with the Tophet in the valley of Gehenna, when it is destroyed by King Josiah. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Molech. In later rabbinic literature, Gehenna became associated with divine punishment as the destination of the wicked for the atonement of their sins. The term is different from the more neutral term Sheol, the abode of the dead. The King James Version of the Bible translates both with the Anglo-Saxon word hell. A number of scholars have also drawn the conclusion that infant sacrifice, whether to the underworld deity Molech or to Yahweh himself, was a part of Israelite Judahite religion until the reforms of King Josiah in the late 7th century BCE. Haganah was the main Zionist paramilitary organization that operated for the Yishuv in the British Mandate for Palestine. It was founded in 1920 to defend the Yishuv's presence in the region, and was formally disbanded in 1948. When it became the core force integrated into the Israel Defense Forces shortly after the Israeli Declaration of Independence. Formed out of previous existing militias, Haganah's original purpose was to defend Jewish settlements against Arab attacks. This was the case during the 1921 Uffa riots, the 1929 Palestine riots, the 1936 Uffa riots, and the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine, among others. The paramilitary was under the control of the Jewish Agency, the official governmental body in charge of Palestine's Jewish community during the British era. Until the end of World War II, Haganah's activities were moderate, in accordance with the strategic policy of 𝗧𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗁𝗍, self-restraint, which caused the breakaway of the more radical paramilitaries, Irgun and 𝗍𝗰𝗲. Haganah militants received clandestine military support from Poland and sought cooperation with the United Kingdom in the event of an Axis-led invasion of Palestine through North Africa, prompting the creation of the Polmuk, their elite fighting force, in 1941. Following the end of World War II, the British refused to lift the restrictions on Jewish immigration that they had imposed with the 1939 White Paper. This resulted in Haganah leading a Jewish insurgency against the British authorities in Palestine. The campaign included the paramilitaries' bombing of bridges, railways, and ships used to deport illegal Jewish immigrants, as well as assisting in bringing more diaspora Jews to Palestine in defiance of British policies. After the adoption of the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine in 1947, Haganah came into the open as the biggest fighting force among the Palestinian Jews, successfully overcoming Arab militias during the Palestinian Civil War. After the declaration of independence of the State of Israel, the Haganah became the new nation's military force. Shortly after Israeli independence and the beginning of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Haganah was merged with other paramilitary groups and reorganized into the Israel Defense Forces. The Irgun, officially the national military organization in the Land of Israel, often abbreviated as Hetzel or IZL, was a Zionist paramilitary organization that operated in Mandatory Palestine between 1931 and 1948. It was an offshoot of the older and larger Jewish paramilitary organization Haganah. The Irgun policy was based on what was then called revisionist Zionism, founded by 𝗧𝗿𝗍𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗍𝗐. Two of the most infamous operations for which the Irgun were known: the bombing of the British administrative headquarters for Mandatory Palestine in Jerusalem on the 22nd of July 1946, and the Deir Yassin massacre that killed at least 107 Palestinian Arab villagers, including women and children, carried out with 𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 on the 9th of April 1948. The organization committed acts of terrorism against Palestinian Arabs, as well as against the British authorities, who were regarded as illegal occupiers. In particular, the Irgun was described as a terrorist organization by the United Nations, British, and United States governments, in media such as the New York Times newspaper, as well as by the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry, the 1946 Zionist Congress and the Jewish Agency. Hannah Arendt and Albert Einstein, in a letter to the New York Times in 1948, compared Irgun and its successor Harrod Party to Nazi and fascist parties and described it as a terrorist, right-wing, chauvinist organization. Following the establishment of the State of Israel during the 1948 Palestine War, the Irgun began to be absorbed into the newly created Israel Defense Forces. Conflict between the Irgun and the IDF escalated into the 1948 Altalena affair, and the Irgun formally disbanded on January 12, 1949. The Irgun was a political predecessor to Israel's right-wing Harrod, or Freedom Party, which led to today's Likud Party. Likud has led or been part of most Israeli governments since 1977. Benjamin Netanyahu, born 21st of October 1949, is an Israeli politician who has served as the Prime Minister of Israel since 2022, having previously held the office from 1996 to 1999, and from 2009 to 2021. Netanyahu, who is the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history, having served a total of over 17 years. Born to secular Jewish parents, Netanyahu, who was raised in West Jerusalem and the United States, he returned to Israel in 1967 to join the Israel Defense Forces and served in the 𝗧𝗍𝗱𝗡 Special Forces as a captain before being honorably discharged. In 1972, he returned to the United States, and after graduating from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Netanyahu worked for the Boston Consulting Group before moving back to Israel in 1978 to found the Yonatan Netanyahu Anti-Terror Institute. Between 1984 and 1988, Netanyahu, who was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. Netanyahu rose to prominence after election as chair of Likud in 1993, becoming leader of the opposition. Netanyahu returned to lead Likud in 2005 and was leader of the opposition between 2006 and 2009. After the 2009 legislative election, Netanyahu formed a coalition with other right-wing parties and became prime minister again. He led Likud to victory in the 2013 and 2015 elections. Netanyahu, who made his closeness to Donald Trump, a friend since the 1980s, central to his appeal from 2016. 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲, officially the Fighters for the Freedom of Israel, and often known pejoratively as the Stern Gang, was a Zionist paramilitary militant organization founded by Avraham Yair Stern in Mandatory Palestine. Its avowed aim was to evict the British authorities from Palestine by use of violence, allowing unrestricted immigration of Jews and the formation of a Jewish state. It was initially called the National Military Organization in Israel, upon being founded in August 1940, but was renamed 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲 1 month later. The group referred to its members as terrorists and admitted to having carried out acts of terrorism. 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲 split from the Irgun militant group in 1940 in order to continue fighting the British during World War II. It initially sought an alliance with Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Believing that Nazi Germany was a lesser enemy of the Jews than Britain, 𝗧𝗍𝗲 twice attempted to form an alliance with the Nazis, proposing a Jewish state based on nationalist and totalitarian principles, and linked to the German Reich by an alliance. After Stern's death in 1942, the new leadership of 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲 began to move towards support for Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union and the ideology of National Bolshevism, which was considered an amalgam of both right and left. Regarding themselves as revolutionary socialists, the new 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲 developed a highly original ideology, combining an almost mystical belief in Greater Israel with support for the Arab liberation struggle. In April 1948, 𝗧𝗍𝗲 and the Irgun were jointly responsible for the massacre in Deir Yassin of at least 107 Palestinian Arab villages, including women and children. 𝗧𝗍𝗲 assassinated Lord Moyne, British minister resident in the Middle East, and made many other attacks on the British in Palestine. On the 29th of May 1948, the government of Israel, having inducted its activist members into the Israel Defense Forces, formally disbanded 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲, though some of its members carried out one more terrorist act, the assassination of 𝗧𝗿𝗍𝗶𝗁𝗲 some months later, an act condemned by Bernadotte's replacement as mediator, 𝗖𝗆𝗆𝗱𝗆𝗆. After the assassination, the new Israeli government declared 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲 a terrorist organization, arresting some 200 members and convicting some of the leaders. Just before the first Israeli elections, in January 1949, a general amnesty to 𝗧𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗲 members was granted by the government. In 1980, Israel instituted a military decoration, an award for activity in the struggle for the establishment of Israel, the 𝗧𝗍𝗲 ribbon. Former 𝗧𝗍𝗲 leader 𝗖𝘆𝗰𝗍𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗍𝗲 became prime minister of Israel in 1983. Relations between Argentina and Israel began shortly after the Israeli Declaration of Independence in 1948, with the countries establishing diplomatic relations on the 31st of May 1949. Relations between the two were tied during the early years of Nazi hunting, when Israel's Mossad kidnapped former Nazi Adolf Eichmann, despite Argentine protestations of a violation of its sovereignty. Immediately after World War II, Argentina was a safe haven for former Nazi officials because they brought badly needed capital investment and/or technical expertise. According to declassified British Foreign and Commonwealth Office documents, Israel sold arms to Argentina before and during the Falklands War in 1982. The arms sales to Argentina included Douglas A-4 Skyhawk jets, which would later be used in the war with the United Kingdom.